Hello and welcome to this webinar from the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications. I'm Nathan Turner and I'm joined today by my co-host Jenny May Roberts. And we're going to mark National Mentoring Day with this webinar by hosting an interview between two of our members, Dan and Adrian. And they're going to share some insights into the world of mentoring. So we're going to explore the role of mentoring in skills and development and growth for the mathematics community, and how the IMA's mentoring platform, IMA Exponential, can help shape careers, build networks, and have a lasting impact. Since we launched IMA Exponential in March 2024, we've seen the number of users grow to 160 and still counting. So, Jenny, if you're ready, we'll get into it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you for that, Nathan. That's brilliant. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Dan and Adrian. We very much appreciate your time. Dan, we know that you're kind of an expert in the field of mentoring and you have quite a bit of experience in that field. So we very much appreciate you coming along to give us some insight into what your journey has been in the mentoring kind of field, and also Adrian as well, as your relationship together as well.
Yes, it would be really good to start with a brief introduction if we can. Adrian, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Adrian. I've spent about 21 years in the visual effects industry. I graduated from my part-time degree in mathematics 2 years ago. It took me 10 years to complete because I was doing it part-time alongside my my full-time job.
Great. And what about you, Dan?
Hi, everyone. My name's Daniel Tilley. I'm an independent consultant working in defence and security. I'm coming up to my 5th year anniversary of running my own consultancy independently. I've worked for a big government organisation. I've worked for a smaller 50-person consultancy, plus also a startup in my 24-year long career. I first joined the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications in 1996, where I've taken on a number of different roles during that time since then. So I've run branches, I've sat on council, I've organised conferences, etc. And I'm also a mentor for the IMA, as I do for a number of other organisations as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So I think the first thing that'd be really good to get into is how your relationship began. Adrian, could you give us a bit of a introduction into how your mentoring journey with Dan started, and perhaps if there was something that really sparked a connection between the two of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I started out, I started out looking for a mentor. I was really looking for someone to talk to about what to do with this new maths degree that I found myself with. And ideally, I was looking for someone that was from a very different background, both in terms of kind of education and current career, to gain some kind of understanding about how else to grow as a mathematician. And Dan really stood out because of his background in defence. Like, I don't think it's possible to get more distant from visual effects for film than some government related work, especially in defence. So that was what really made Dan stand out in this instance.
And what's your perspective on that, Dan?
Yes, it's pretty much the same, though obviously from my perspective. You know, when Adrian contacted me, one of the interesting things I found was that Adrian was working for Pixar doing visual effects, etc., things like that. And film animation isn't necessarily, if you don't work in that area, something you necessarily associate with mathematics too much. But actually speaking with Adrian, I've got a new appreciation for how mathematics is used within the film industry. And I'm a big film fan, so that was great. And I've really found working with Adrian really interesting. So yeah, great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So obviously very different fields, very different backgrounds, but potentially that brings something unique to a mentoring relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Was just from my side, was there anything that kind of stuck out for you, Adrian, as to how Dan would be a nice fit for you? Like, did you kind of contemplate other mentors, or what kind of honed in on Dan as, you know, what you thought would work as a good kind of mentoring relationship?
Yes, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when I looked, I had this vague intention for had my fingers crossed that it would work out this way, and thankfully it did. I managed to find Dan, who was great because he has a really solid professional background using mathematics in his job. I was also lucky enough to find a second mentor through the same scheme with the IMA, who has more of a background in academia. And so to be talking about similar similar areas where I currently am on my mathematics journey with someone with a very established mathematics career, professionally working in industry, and someone in academia gives me quite a broad, broad-reaching kind of way of reflecting upon where I am currently.
Yeah, and interesting, in like in your time in Pixar, did you have any kind of mentoring there, or was that not a thing? Or
Well, I had one of the reasons I knew this kind of relationship would work rather well was because I have taken part in a mentoring program with Disney on the Disney side, and that turned out very well. So I know going into this, I kind of knew how successful it could be.
yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for that.
My instinct was to ask you the question, Adrian, which Disney character was mentoring you, but I suspect it probably wasn't actually a character, was it? It was probably somebody in in the company.
Not in this instance, though.
That's a shame. That's a shame. So obviously we've got lots of people signing up now for the IMA Exponential platform, which is great. And you guys have found each other. For people that are maybe new to the platform or haven't signed up yet, it'd be really good to get your perspective, both Adrian and Dan, on how you found using the platform to sort of sign up and to link you with a mentor and mentee. Do you want to start on that, Adrian?
Yeah, my memory of it was that it was very easy. I think it's probably about 5 months ago, so my memory's a bit hazy, but it was extremely easy. From memory, there was just a directory of potential mentors and a description as to their background and expertise and what they're about. So it became very easy to go through and have a quick browse and find the kind of people that may be good to complement you in your current situation. So yeah, it's very easy.
Great. And Dan, how did you find the experience of using the system?
Well, like Adrian, I found it very straightforward. It was very easy to log on, create an account, and create a profile for myself. Admittedly, a lot of what's in the profile on there actually was copy stroke rewording from things like LinkedIn and my CV, etc. But so it wasn't like I was writing new material. And from a mentor perspective, I created my profile and thought to myself, okay, I'll wait to see who contacts me, etc. And wait to see someone contacted me. We had initial talks via the platform, and then we sort of like moved over to email and set up our first meeting. So really, really straightforward.
That's great. Really good. So I think we've touched a little bit already on why you might have seeked out a mentor, Adrian, and you talked about some of your previous experiences with mentoring. Was there a particular reason that you wanted to go down the route of having a more of a mathematics mentor through the IMA?
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, being in the visual effects industry for 21 years is kind of all I've ever known. And then starting my mathematics degree part-time as a mature student, and then finishing my degree put me in this place where, because visual effects was all I'd ever known, I kind of didn't really know what the next step could be or how to take advantage of my degree as it sat there. So that was really my reason for reaching out, getting an understanding of what could be there for me and how to extend my career.
Yeah, definitely. And And for you, Dan, obviously you talked about doing lots of mentoring in the past. Do you think how's your mentoring journey developed, and what sort of benefits do you think you've got out of being a mentor?
Right. Well, I'll just start by saying that I have been mentored myself by a number of people through my career, both officially and unofficially, and I always found those relationships very beneficial to myself. And I've always wanted to give something back, so I have always taken the opportunity to meet new people, to act as a mentor when it appropriately arises. So, for instance, at the first organization I worked for, they actually had a mentorship program for people who were looking to get chartered within mathematics, within the IMA. And I sort of like mentored a few people through that. Later on, for various professional societies I'm involved with, I've acted as a mentor. So, and I just find, making those connections can be so rewarding. To one extreme, actually, some of those connections have led to work, or actually working on projects with some of my mentees, or being introduced to someone by my mentee who has led to a project. So sometimes from that point of view, it's actually led to paid work, or me achieving something I've always wanted to achieve. So for instance, someone helped me, one of my mentees helped me with organizing a conference a few years ago. So all of these things are there. The relationship is reciprocal, though we do have to remember that it's the mentee's journey that's important, not the mentor's.
Yeah, it just goes to show that actually mentoring, like in that capacity, can open up so many opportunities. And I know it's not a networking, but it definitely can help with networking and opening up those kind of conversations that lead to kind of going to the same events, et cetera, which can definitely kind of form different kind of professional relationships in different areas that you would never probably get the opportunity to. So yeah, so although it's mentoring, I feel like, yeah, there is opportunity. And for you, you have that experience that it has opened up kind of certain doors for you as well. So that's great. Do you still get mentored now, Dan, or have you got a mentor now, or no?
I don't have a mentor specifically at the moment, but it is something I'm actually looking into now. I've had mentors for the Royal Academy of Engineering through various jobs I've done, through the IMA, etc. So yeah, it is something I'm currently looking at to see if I can get a new mentor in terms of where I'm going now on my journey. So
yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I've always been really interested by the scenario that people can find themselves in, where you might be, well, everyone is partway through their journey to some extent, but if you're sort of 10 years into your career, for example, and you're helping out with early career mathematicians through mentoring, you're probably also in a situation where you really need some mentorship yourself for that direction, or that maybe developing those crucial skills to get you to the next stage. And so it's really interesting, I think, to think about the position that you're in if you're being mentored and you're mentoring others at the same time.
absolutely.
So that's quite a nice link into some of the challenges of mentorship, I think, as well. Can you think of anything, Adrian, where you've sort of had an obstacle or a challenge as part of a mentoring relationship that you've overcome, and how did you work through it with your mentor?
I think so far, Dan, things have gone rather smoothly, haven't they? I think the one thing that has been a bit tricky is finding time within the relationship that you build. Obviously, you have the freedom to set your own goals, and as such your own deadline for those goals. But I think still you're trying to maintain this relationship and build something from it amongst the personal life and your professional working life. And so balancing that can be a bit tricky. And I'd say that's the only thing we've come across. And in those instances, when we do meet up to discuss, how far I've come and how far I haven't come, we rearrange our expectations and our deadlines in such a way where we kind of account for any time that's been lost because either of us have been particularly busy. So in that sense, it's kind of been fine.
Yeah, and has your majority of your conversations been held online?
Yes, all except one conversation, which was 3 weeks ago at the IMA 60th anniversary, where I met Dan in person for the first time. So that was
Yeah.
nice meeting you in person finally. But yeah, typically they're all over Zoom, all online.
Yeah,
That was a nice day to meet for the first time, wasn't it? Nice location.
Yes.
so yeah, I guess the fact that you can do the mentoring online is helpful from a time perspective, to some extent, but potentially has some of its own challenges where that personal connection, sometimes it can be good to meet up in person. But I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about IMA events and going to different things. Obviously all the IMA conferences, IMA branch events, things like that are all great opportunities as well, to go and meet your mentor for a coffee or to chat with them either side. So hopefully through the mentoring scheme, we can foster a few more relationships that mean that we meet up in person as well. And for you, Dan, in terms of challenges, I guess you touched on having several mentees, and some mentors through your career. How do you find the challenge of time and fitting everything in?
In terms of meeting up with the mentees, that isn't too much of an issue. Sometimes you have to rearrange meetings. That's because usually work gets in the way or something like that. So that's a slight challenge, but I think everyone sort of like understands that, things are happening in everyday life that need to be tackled, as it were. I think like Adrian says, everything's gone fairly smoothly. The time thing as well that Adrian mentions, I don't see that as being an issue in terms of the fact that that sort of thing is almost expected, sort of thing. No plan survives contact with the enemy, sort of thing. You put in a plan, you put down objectives, you put down dates, you don't quite make it for whatever reason to get those things finished. That's completely normal. Actually, just writing down those objectives is actually the most important thing to actually know, okay, this is where I'm going. Having a date next to them is also good, simply to say, okay, that's what I'm aiming for. And if you go over that, you push it to the right slightly. But without that date, obviously, it can be forgotten, initially. So I think that's all good. In terms of challenges that I've potentially faced, not with Adrian, and in general, not at all. But there's a couple of things that mentors need to be aware of. First of all, there's the situation where you can, you've got to be careful not to tell your mentee what to do. You're advising, they are still the decision maker, the mentee. It's about their life, it's about their journey. The other thing is you occasionally, very occasionally, again, not the case in terms of Adrian, you get a mentee who turns up and kind of expects you to solve all their problems, and they don't have sort of like an understanding. And a lot of sort of like working with them when that occurs, and it hasn't occurred with the IMA people that I've known, is just sort of like trying to build up their confidence to actually start them on the journey of saying, I want to do this, I want to go there, I want to become this sort of thing. And I think that's important. So it's about, to me, it's about building confidence, but also listening and just advising, not telling. So those are the things we must remember.
Yeah, and I think for a mentor, all those skills are super important in leadership. Whatever discipline you work in, or whatever you do in your life, whether it's volunteering or working, I think those skills of listening and the ability to steer somebody in their own direction rather than tell somebody how to do something, those are all super important for developing people and developing people's skills. So that's a really good thing to touch on.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a mentee, we're having somebody, I think the IMA platform is really good for, professionals to be able to go outside of their academia or industry, whichever they may be in, to have that kind of safe space, that confidentiality, that they can have those discussions and talk about stuff openly without feeling judged or any kind of political stuff that's going on within the, wherever they may be. And for me, that I think is always quite nice to have a mentor that can guide me without that judgment. So I always like that. I mean, I know employee ones work really well as well, but having probably both is probably the sweet spot for me anyway.
Yeah, and Dan, I think you touched there on kind of capturing the goals and putting some dates against things to try and focus the mind on when we're going to try to make impact some change. I'm interested to know, Adrian, for you, how did you go about capturing those goals and that information? Did you sort of summarize it in a document, or did you do something more casual with Dan? What was your approach to that?
Yeah, I think the way it started out was, I think the conversation was initially rather casual to kind of on Dan's part fully understand the problem statement, and for me to properly describe the problem statement. I think it's quite generally talking about career growth can be quite an open general thing. But as we got on, yes, I was taking notes digitally that I'd forward to Dan based on the conversations that we had. It's quite easy and clear to work out what the next goals were based on our conversations, and then act upon them and review them in the next meeting. So yeah, just keeping notes digitally and working through things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it, isn't it? And there's obviously different levels to which you can formalize that. You can draft a document at the beginning that you both agree to, and you can try to work through that together, or you can be a bit more casual for the first session, perhaps just to get more of a feel of what the challenges are, what you're looking to do, and then see where it goes. What are your thoughts, Jenny, on that? Is there a space for sort of sharing things like templates of that sort of document, or suggestions for mentors and mentees of how they might do that?
I guess it depends on the relationship and how people, I mean, some people quite like the informal kind of chat of it and just kind of going with the flow. Some people quite like a structured approach. So I really think it really depends on the relationship and how the mentee kind of wants to be mentored. If it's in that capacity of just kind of everything just kind of organically just flowing through conversation and then taking kind of some notes and then making goals out of that, or whether the mentee would prefer a more structured approach of like, bring your goals to the meeting. This is what we want to achieve. Can you help me with X, Y, and Z? So I guess it depends, really. That's how I think I would imagine. But for me, my one is not very structured. It's more kind of, I'm still in the early stages of my relationship with my mentor. So we haven't put any kind of real goals in yet. We're still understanding kind of my role and all of that. So yeah, I'm quite early in, but he has helped me immensely already. So yeah, I think we'll probably the next meeting, it will be a bit more about goals and objectives as well.
Yeah, that's probably the natural way that it goes, isn't it? Where it starts out necessarily a bit more informally, and then you can structure it as much as you feel you need to. But I totally agree with you. It depends on the type of person that the mentor is and the type of person the mentee is, and whether there's how much synergy there is there between the ways of working and what people like to do.
Yeah, I think it's hard because you want that kind of organic conversations and for that relationship to kind of be a bit more, I guess, intimate in that sense that you're just chatting rather than it being so structured. But that's just my take on it anyway. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps a good point as well to come in on. What advice would we give to anybody that's looking to seek mentorship? So if I can come to you, Adrian, and ask, I guess, if there's one thing you would advise people to do, or more than one thing you'd advise people to do, perhaps something you did or something that you didn't do in your early stages of seeking mentors. Have you got any advice for somebody searching?
I think I've got two pieces of advice. I think two key ones. I think we touched upon one of them just now, and that is that it's okay to go into that relationship without a plan, without any goal in mind, because some of the things like career growth is such a general topic, and it's okay to go into that relationship and talk generally about it and find some goals out of that. You don't need something completely clear in your head to be able to present as a goal to any potential mentor. So that's the first thing. A lot of it is about discovery. The second thing is that likewise, it's okay to have more than one mentor. There are different things to be learnt from different people, and I feel like I'm benefiting from that certainly.
Yeah, that's some really good advice there. And I think the other thing I would add is that it's okay to meet with a mentor initially and have that, you know, initial chemistry session and try to get common ground on what you're looking at. And maybe you realize that it's not the relationship you need, or it's not the person you need to speak to. And I think that's fine as well. You know, everybody should feel comfortable to say that this isn't quite what I was looking for, or, you know, you haven't quite got the background I was hoping for. But in my experience, having said that, almost everybody you speak to has got something really good to say, you know, some really good advice for you. So I don't think we should be scared about going into mentoring relationships with people we don't quite know the background. You know, there's definitely something to discover there.
Yeah.
I think there sorry, Jenny, do you want to go on?
No, I was just going to say that's probably why it's a good idea to maybe have two and just kind of like, you know, test the waters. It's okay if one doesn't work out, and you can try. Sometimes like that, you just don't have the connection. They might be absolutely brilliant, but you also need to kind of get on and, like, you know, have that kind of relationship that will carry you through the mentoring program. Sorry, Adrian.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just going to say that I feel I've been lucky with the mentors I've had in the past and the mentors I have now, that the relationship has worked out well. I think if there's any anxiety surrounding a relationship not working out, which may be holding you back from mentorship or menteeship, I think it's important to remember that the relationship is always two-way. So that one person would always want the other to get something out of it. And if that's not going to be the case, then there ends up being a mutual understanding that, okay, this isn't working out. That's totally fine. Let's not meet further and find another mentee or mentor where it can work out. So that understanding, I think, is always there. So it's a low stress relationship if it doesn't work out.
That's more great advice. Thanks, Adrian. And I think on the mentor side, Dan, obviously we might have lots of people. We've probably got lots of experienced professionals in the IMA with several years experience in the maths industry, or many years experience in the maths industry, who are looking to become mentors. Is there anything you would any advice you would give to somebody that's maybe starting out being a mentor for the first time?
Right. Well, my advice would be, first of all, do it, become a mentor. It will sort of like help you develop yourself. It's useful if you've been a mentee in the past. You know, I think it's so you understand the other side of the fence, as it were. But I think as long as you're, as I've said before, as long as you're willing to listen, to be supportive, you know, of your mentee, and understand that it's their journey, not yours, that's fine. Although the relationship can be reciprocal, you know, you can sort of like get as much out of, you know, working with the mentee as the mentor. Working with the mentee as the mentee themselves get out of the relationship. But you just need to sort of like understand that being a mentor is usually a case of, you're usually someone who's got a bit more experience in the area. You're not a coach. You're not a sort of like you're not sort of like you're not sort of like providing therapy or anything like that. You're not a coach. You're not sort of like got a certificate that says you're a coach or anything like that. You're somebody who's got a bit more experience. The mentee hopefully gains insights by listening to your journey, by understanding your journey, etc., and what you did. You know, so for instance, I talked to Adrian. You know, we had chats about furthering Adrian's education through courses, through books, etc., and things like that, and you know, those sort of things. You know, that's how I sort of like went about it. I think Adrian finds that useful. So it's things like that that you need to be discussing at the initial stage. But yeah, it's also useful just to take on to get some advice in terms of what the mentoring relationship should be like if you want to be a mentor.
Yeah, that's a really good summary there, Dan. And something you touched on as well was the reciprocity of that relationship. You know, getting something from it as the mentor as well. And I think there's a lot of really great benefits. What do you think the most important two or three aspects of that kind of reverse mentoring relationship are for you?
Well, you get to understand different areas of work, how mathematics from the IMA mentorship point of view is how the techniques are being used in that field. So in that, you know, into visual effects from the point of Adrian. You also make new connections, which you know, through your mentee sometimes. And you learn about, and like I said, you learn about these new techniques, sometimes which you can then go on to actually use elsewhere. And it won't necessarily be mathematical techniques. It might be other things that you discuss, sort of thing. You know, so for instance, Adrian has mentioned a couple of books to me that I might be sort of like purchasing, and a couple of mathematical techniques which I've not come across before, as it were. So yeah, mathematics being a very big area, I've not learned everything. So yeah, but also there is when the relationship works, and you know, everyone said about everyone else in this call has said about, you know, sounding each other out in terms of being a mentee stroke mentor initially. Actually, along the path, anytime if it's not working out, or you know, you're coming to a natural conclusion to the relationship of mentee stroke mentor, then that can come to an end at any point. You know, 6 months into the future, 2 years into the future. Sometimes you're limited by the organization you're working with. So one organization is telling me I'll have 6 months with a new mentee, which not that long. So, you know, there's various things like that, but you just get sometimes a certain feeling of satisfaction working with the mentee as you see them grow, as you see them develop, as you see them sort of like begin to understand, you know, a bit more about the journey that they're on and how to develop themselves.
Over the years, Dan, have you seen, like, I guess you probably have with your mentees, see them progress in their career and get kind of like, I don't know, promotions based on, like, you know, their progression and stuff like that?
I've seen mentees of mine go on to sort of like hold fairly high level roles, well above, you know, any role that I would ever want to apply for, you know. I don't necessarily think that had anything to do with me per se, other than sort of like, hopefully there were some bits in there which allowed them to develop and move on that journey. But I don't think necessarily was a case of, oh, I met Dan and so one day I became chief executive of this firm or something like that.
But it was probably a small part of
There may have been a small
part of that kind of holistic things that they were doing in order to incremental steps, and part of that being a mentoring journey as well.
It is a journey, and sort of like we're taking different paths. Sometimes we're going off on different tributaries, sort of thing, different sort of like little pathlets that don't work out and you come back to the main road. But it is a journey, and it is all about the different people you meet and the different things you learn on that journey. And hopefully Adrian's learning, or Adrian is developing in small ways which are really going to help his career in the future. But yeah, I mean, there's a journey where Adrian will meet lots of other people which are also going to help in that journey.
It's only ever going to be positive, though. It's definitely, having that guidance and those regular catch-ups, just to kind of have that kind of person that is there to kind of give you that advice, give you the tools, in order to kind of, I guess, your toolbox, put some stuff in it. And like, yeah, as you said, you don't tell them what to do, but you hopefully equip them enough to be able to make a decision confidently.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's all about advice and just help and support where you can. But also, I think one of the benefits is that I'm not actually part of the visual effects community. For Adrian, one of the benefits is I'm not part of the visual effects community. I'm outside, so I give a different perspective. Plus, also, we can have sometimes, I'm not sure this is necessarily the case with Adrian, but sometimes with your mentee, you can have a slightly more honest and open conversation in terms of sort of like what they're willing to tell you about their work than say, than say you might be willing to talk with your mentor at the company you work for. So,
yeah, I think having that different perspective is really important, isn't it? And it because you have that confidence of the confidentiality. If there is something you need to talk about that's difficult, then you can go down that road as well. That's great. I think you should take credit, Dan, for all the chief executives and people that you've mentored over the years. Take a little bit of credit for it.
I should say that I don't think anyone's become a chief executive that I mentored, but I have seen people rise up the ladder very quickly and go into sort of like really quite big jobs, big roles within companies. So that's always good.
I have very high expectations now, Dan.
Well, Adrian, I would say that actually, we've had the chat, and I would say you actually had a fairly high level already, sort of thing. So, but anything I can do which helped you continue to develop, great.
We'll keep our eyes peeled for LinkedIn, Adrian, your profile update.
So I think that's a really nice segue actually into something else we were going to touch on today, which is about the future of mentoring in the mathematics community. If I can come to you, Adrian, I guess what is your view of the future in terms of mentoring for mathematics? What do you think mentoring can bring to the mathematical sciences? Quite a big question.
It is a big question. I think it's also important to bear in mind I am partway through this journey with Dan, and just starting the beginning of a new chapter of mathematics. So just my own opinion is that mathematics is so broad in the way it might affect the IMA and the wider mathematical community. Of course, like we know that mathematics is so broad, and it can only be valuable to gain different perspectives on the subject. And then in terms of connected to that, certainly the main topic of our conversation is career growth. And within that, there are so many possibilities, and it's just invaluable to learn from others' experiences. Even whether it's like a brief network conversation that lasts a minute, the mentorship is like a much more valuable version of that in that respect. And I think you can only benefit from relationships like that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Dan, have you got anything to add to that in terms of the importance of mentoring to mathematics?
Well, if you look across the mathematical community, there's a lot of different subjects in mathematics. There's defense, there's visual effects, there's finance, that we could probably sort of like spend an hour just going through the different subjects which use mathematics to significantly to actually sort of like produce industry goals, business goals, etc. And one of the issues with that is it sometimes feels like the mathematical community is becoming more and more fragmented. And as I said before, being able to network, whether it be through networking events, conferences, etc., but also things like mentoring, where you're being paired with someone who isn't necessarily with your area of work, does allow you to talk to somebody who may be using different techniques than you, maybe sort of like be able to bring the mathematical community slightly more together by understanding what Adrian's doing in the visual effects department, etc. What person X is doing in finance. We might all be using slightly different techniques, or techniques that we all use, but in slightly different ways. Yeah. And learning and understanding that can only help and develop mathematics more. It's about sort of like bringing the community back together, networking. That's all key. And, we're all mathematicians, you've got statistics, you've got sort of like a more pure maths, you've got applied maths, you've got operational research, etc. Things like that. So yeah, to my mind, it's about networking and the opportunity to learn new ideas, whether you're a mentor or a mentee.
Yeah, I feel like that knowledge sharing is just like huge, and obviously passed on. The more you can do that with and cross exchange in every way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter what kind of area you are in. Like you say, Adrian's is so different. So having that is probably really insightful, because actually you could probably use those practices or techniques somewhere else that might work really great in something else, but you would never put the two together sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think and one of the problems with events is, particularly ones which you have to go to in person, I'm never likely to go to, say, a finance conference. Yeah, because it doesn't particularly interest me, but there might be someone there who I could connect with, but I won't get the opportunity, sort of thing. Bringing people together at events is great, but you do need to have other ways to meet people who are outside your sphere. And mentor/mentee relationship is one way of doing that. And there are sort of like other sort of like networking events out there that you can consider, but this is definitely one of the stronger ways, I think, because it allows you to really build that connection and learn from each other.
Yeah, that's really good. And I guess having the potentially the common ground of mathematics and mathematical techniques to build on. Certainly if you're talking about a relationship between someone who's worked in industry for 15 or 20 years and an early career researcher who's not really seen the industry side, maybe they've worked at university and they've got that different perspective. I think being able to share some of the soft skills as well that you don't get taught through formal education, that's another thing that for me that's really important in mentoring, for sure.
Yeah, I think we talked about that reverse mentoring as well, where I guess the younger generation certainly have technology at their fingertips, and they kind of get in touch with all the kind of AI new things that is happening. So they can very much learn us as well, in that sense of where I know I'm kind of very much try to keep away from my phone as much, but they're always on it. So I guess they're probably quite more digital minded as well, and can still learn from them.
Yes, can I just say here that you touched on an interesting point there, which is it's not just about mathematics. It's also about those skills you need to develop to be more professional in your mathematical career. Yeah. So communication is a key one. Yeah. When I was younger, very poor communicator. I have improved a lot. I'm still not the greatest communicator on the planet, but I have improved a lot in terms of giving presentations, written communication, etc. So these things, as well as a lot of others, such as understanding contracts, etc., they're all in this sort of like chartered mathematician competencies. So I won't go into too much detail on them, but they're all important to learn, to understand. And I think, again, a mentor can help in that space as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I think everybody kind of struggles. I know I do as well, like with that, when you're kind of as well first going into a certain area of your career where you may have to present to large crowds, or you may have to put papers together for boards, and that might necessarily mean it's completely different to what you're doing on a day-to-day, but because you've come up that level, you're expected to then produce X, Y, and Z. And I think that's really important to showcase that as well, that it's actually not just down to maths, it's actually probably communicating maths in a way for an audience to understand as well, not as a mathematician, because a lot of people are not mathematicians that you probably will be presenting work to or presenting to.
Yeah, that's a really good skill to touch on as well, isn't it? Which I think in the early stages of anybody's career, they probably haven't had the exposure to that, and so yeah, somebody with more experience can give you some guidance on how to start out.
I think that could be a whole kind of hour of chat on its own, communication and maths.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's been some really good insight there into both of your journeys in mentoring, and it's been really interesting to hear about it. I think what would be really nice is if Adrian, if you could give any final thoughts you've got or final takeaways on mentoring that you'd like to summarize or share.
Yeah, I think I've got a couple that I haven't mentioned. I think although I already have an established career, as I mentioned, there's no age limit. Like you can do this at degree level. You can reach out. You're a student, you can reach out for mentorship. There's no very few kind of very small, not a non-existent bound on your age as to when you can do something like this. And then the other thing I'll say is that, like we touched on before, it's okay to keep conversation casual early on. And it's okay for that casual conversation to last as long as you need it to. But at some point, there needs to be clear goals and even a rough idea of a deadline as to when those goals are going to be complete. That's how you get value out of it. And one of the ways that you can determine as to whether or not the relationship may not be working is if you maybe can't go beyond just that casual chat thing. You can't find that much of a solid goal. If that's the case, then maybe it's time to move on, and that's completely fine.
Wonderful, thank you, Adrian. And Dan, any parting thoughts from you on mentoring and your experiences?
My experience of mentoring has always been very positive, both from point of view of being a mentee and also being a mentor. I agree with what Adrian has said. I think, and like I said previously, I think if you want to be a mentor in the future, and I do recommend it because it is important to help support those who are developing in the same direction you are, because it's important to help your subject area, your business, to actually make sure I'll keep wanting to say next generation. That's not quite true, because like Adrian says, it's not necessarily the very young people, but the next group who are coming up and going to be filling the type of roles that you did or do as the businesses expand. It's very important. As a mentor, remember, if you want to be a mentor, remember to listen first. Okay. Advise, but not tell. And be supportive. Critical, yes, but constructively, So, you might say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. I might have done it this way, or something like that. Give something to say, someone comes to you and says, well, I did this and it didn't work out. You might be able to give some advice on how they might reapproach that in a constructive way, that can help them actually achieve their goals. But yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Dan. And Jenny, finally, you've been involved in setting up a lot of the IMA's mentoring scheme. Is there anything you'd like to touch on for the listeners in terms of how they can get involved and what they can do to experience it?
Yeah, well, as it's a benefit, and I think like if you've got IMA membership, like you should really give it a go. You've got nothing to lose. If anything, it's only a gain. I think even if you go and think it's not for you, at least you know. But I think you'd be probably pleasantly surprised of what you can get from it. And if time is the challenge, like we discussed, that time can be very challenging for people. That just try and, like Dan and Adrian said, just get a date and put like, a time to it and see if you can do it. But yeah, it's definitely worth giving it a go for sure. But yeah, that would be my take. But yeah, I mean, I think for both mentor and mentee, there's definitely benefits for both.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I think reflecting on the time piece, my experience has certainly been that any mentoring arrangement that I've gone into, either as a mentor or a mentee in the past, it's more than paid for itself in terms of time. So you'll gain skills and knowledge, and you'll change your approach to things that will easily save you the time. So if obviously there can be a bit of a short-term concern about that at busy periods, but it will more than pay for itself. So it's a great investment of time as well, is what I would add to that.
Yeah, and again, it can open up doors, like Dan had said previously. It's a great way to kind of, expand your kind of network in that professional space. But yeah, it's definitely worth kind of putting yourself out there to see what it can do for you, for your profession and your progression as well.
That's great. Well, I think we've had a really lovely introduction there to mentoring, and it's really great to get your perspectives, Dan and Adrian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And yeah, as the parting gift, I guess I'll say to everybody, make use of this membership benefit and go and give it a try. Don't be afraid to sign up and take that first step.
Yeah, thank you both again. It's really great to have you today. Appreciate your time with it all. It's brilliant. I'm just gonna